Hello everybody, welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Ume, who's a professional football scout and analyst, and we're here today to go through Mikel Arteta's thrashing of the reigning champions Manchester City as they beat them 5-1 at the Emirates Stadium yesterday. And I'm just going to start straight off by jumping in because we've got a lot that we want to cover today, both for in favour of City and, or not in favour of City, in favour of Arsenal, and some really bad stuff for Manchester City. So the key thing we want to talk about today is that after Erling Haaland did score against Arsenal, Manchester City didn't have a shot against Arsenal after that. Their possession plummeted, and we can see by the data their dual success rate plummeted, and that obviously led Manchester City to capitulate. And some of the stats that have come out of this game are very, very bad for Manchester City, and I want to talk about just how much of a problem this is becoming. So, goal-ending high turnovers, Arsenal have had 3 this season, and 2 of them came against Manchester City. And if you throw on errors leading to goal for Manchester City, that has only happened twice in 5 games under Pep Guardiola in Manchester City. And 3 of them 5 games have come this season, with the others coming in 2020 and 2018, very early on in the Pep Guardiola City reign. There is clearly a problem where City are having technical inconsistencies, and they are struggling to build out. So they're some of the top line stats that we have. It's obviously clear that Manchester City struggle to build out, but it's also really key to mention that Arsenal are one of the best teams out of possession in the Premier League, if not in Europe. And I want Umir to talk through the tactical elements of what Arsenal were trying to do against Manchester City, why they worked so well, and how they forced 2 goals from high turnovers in this game. So I want Umir to kick us off with the tactics, the shapes, what Arsenal were trying to do, and how they had so much success doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it pains me to say this, but Arsenal brilliant against Manchester City, and I think their game predicated a lot on that out of possession strength. Going by the stats that were read at the top of the show, I think it's look, this wasn't an Arsenal side that just sat in like we've seen on previous occasions. Although they had a really strong, centrally compact, astute mid block when they did get penned in a little bit. I think their strength came on when they jumped and pressed Manchester City's backline. So what I'm going to do for this segment is go through some examples, play by play, and kind of explain the rationale behind Arteta's decisions, and then also some of the qualities of the players that they had on the pitch on the day that allowed them to implement some of these tactics. So we can see from Arsenal their set defensive shape, which is a lot more like a 4-4-2 out of possession. It's a fairly compact shape, and what I want to touch on here is the amount of pressure and the intensity of that pressure from the front 2 in Havertz and in Odegaard. I think after the game there was the quotes from Declan Rice where he mentioned, look, they've both come under scrutiny in recent weeks, but the amount of value that they offer, the players know that, and that's particularly in their effort out of possession. The way that they, almost in this hybrid fashion, jump on certain players was really impressive. And if we go a little bit forward to 1 minute 36 into the game, Manchester City moved towards their left-sided defenders in the build-up, and what we noticed throughout the game was sort of Odegaard applying pressure to those defenders, knowing that he could prevent the pass into the defensive midfielders through his cover shadow. Now, cover shadow is essentially the players behind you that the players, sort of the opposition, can't access because you're blocking that passing lane. They managed to force Manchester City to one side, and John Stones tried to play on the side that was cut off. I think in theory it's a good idea, but because the pass wasn't played with the right amount of fizz, with Akanji not being in the right sort of orientation, it was really impressive that Trossard actually pushed forward and recognised that this was a moment in which, in his hybrid role, not to stay on the wide player, but to push forward and try and win the ball high, because that was the free man. And he forced a mistake from Akanji. Declan Rice was super close to him, and in that intensity that he applies, in the ability to recognise the loose ball, he wins possession there, and Arsenal end up scoring from that situation. And it was a really impressive, really impressive movement, a really impressive sort of, synchronised scheme from Arsenal. Like, people talk about Akanji making that mistake, but it was forced by Arsenal's brilliant pressing structures from a Manchester City free kick this time in Arsenal's half. They're pushed back, and Odegaard, sitting on the defensive midfielder, pushes to apply pressure to the centre back, And he does this in a brilliant way. One thing I've noticed in Odegaard's game is when he does press, if the ball gets funneled into one side, he often carries on his pressure, leaving the man that he's already on and almost chasing the ball. And it's not in a headless sort of chicken manner. It's a very strategic way of closing down the pitch and forcing the opposition to play on fewer options. So, on this occasion, the ball goes back. Havertz applies pressure to the centre-back, and instead of actually applying pressure again to the other centre-back, what happens is the ball goes into midfield. Odegaard presses, the defensive midfielder follows the man and the ball back to the centre-backs and forces Manchester City to go all the way back to their keeper. And as a collective, Arsenal again jump on the basis that Odegaard has made that first movement really intensely and carried his team forward. I think a lot of people have criticised Odegaard in the past, but just looking at this game and just looking at these numerous examples, Odegaard's almost this central point on which Arsenal's out of possession work is focused on. The amount of coverage that he does, whether or not he's bouncing between pressing the keeper or pressing the pivot player, or in situations where he decides, look, it's sensible now to push even wider or follow a man. Then Declan Rice with his physicality follows. At times, Thomas Partey follows. And the team move as a collective. All in all, I thought it was really impressive from Arsenal in those coordinated, high-pressing movements. I think when they did, when they were bypassed, they weren't sort of mindlessly pressing. They, formed this very strict, narrow 4-4-2 structure in which the wide players went between, the wide centre-backs, but also stopping the pass into their inverted wingers, into Marmoush and into Foden. And Martinelli and Trossard were brilliant for that. Saliba, when Partey did push forward, went into central midfield as well. So I think that encapsulates all of that. They're willing to take those aggressive steps into sort of unfamiliar areas if the team needs that, but in general they were massively disciplined, really structured, and City probably lacked that structure and discipline in the last 20 or 25 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, perfectly illustrated, really. It's really annoying because you're going to go from speaking about a team that are so structurally amazing in terms of their out of possession work to Manchester City, who, especially in this game and pretty much throughout the entire season, I've struggled out of possession, and we've spoke about it a lot. And you just listed some great examples, and I wanted to talk about an example that I've seen from Manchester City, where in the second half it actually looked like Arsenal were braver in terms of taking more risks on the ball in build-up. And I've got an example here that come around the 53rd minute, and I just want to show you basically everything that happened in this and why structurally, in my opinion, this is just suboptimal pressing situation. So the situation we've got in front of us here is we've got a 3-2 with David Raya splitting the two centre-halves, and then we've got Lewis-Skelly, who's in midfield, next to Thomas Partey, with Rice, Trossard, Odegaard, Martinelli push forward, pinning back. And what actually happens a lot throughout this game is that Phil Foden was tasked with man-marking Lewis-Skelly. But what happened throughout the game is when they were chasing the ball, they were trying to force the ball back and win it high, but Foden was chasing back to Raya, and then he was leaving Lewis-Skelly often unmarked, and there was kind of this confusion around who to pick up Lewis-Skelly, and it felt that when Manchester City were pressing in this moment especially, they were pressing with Marmoush, Foden and Haaland, and we just spoke about there about having narrow wingers. Savinho is not in this picture. Savinho's not in the picture. Haaland is over the halfway point of the pitch. If you split the pitch down the middle, he's over on the other side. So when City are trying to lock onto Arsenal's build-up, pin them to one side, we can see that Erling Haaland is still stood on the other side of the box. He's not got that instinct to lock off the side of the pitch and lock off the passing options. So Gabriel goes back to David Raya. Phil Foden sees that Gabriel Magalhaes is going to become unpressed. He's going to become the spare man, and he actually points to Matheus Nunes to jump and to press and to pin them back. But what happens is, because they've vacated the centre of the pitch and Phil Foden has left his man in Miles Lewis-Skelly, Omar Marmoush has then come across to cover Miles Lewis-Skelly, and then it leaves Thomas Partey open, as we were just speaking about then, in front of Haaland, away from Haaland. Marmoush is nowhere near him because Lewis-Skelly's dragging Marmoush to that side of the pitch, and then they just break through the press by using Thomas Partey as the spare man. And throughout this sequence, it felt that structurally it was very, very poor from Manchester City, but I also feel that we spoke about this numerous times on the podcast as well. Erling Haaland just does not have a pressing instinct. He's just not really a pressing player, and it often feels that when City are pressing, it's more to keep the ball far away from their goal than it is to win it in high turnovers. At least when I've watched City this season, it feels like they are not trying to chase the ball to win it, they're trying to chase it to push it back. And in this example, Arsenal break through the City press and they've got a 4v3 eventually on City's backline. And Kai Havertz does mess up the pass, but this is probably one of the most dangerous situations Arsenal actually had it in the entire game, which is crazy because they didn't score from it and it come before Manchester City's equaliser. To give you an even better example, we've got an example way earlier on in the game, 15 minutes in, and this was Arsenal's first build-up of the game, and they played exactly how you would expect Arsenal to play. David Raya again has split the two centre-halves, Timbers on the right, they've got Miles Lewis-Skelly and Thomas Partey in midfield, with the box of Rice and Ødegaard. And we can see how Phil Foden, again, has man-marked Lewis-Skelly into midfield, and then that leaves this massive gap in City's shape to play down the left-hand side. Because Phil Foden has come inside to stand on Lewis-Skelly, Partey drops to pick up the ball, Marmoush is deciding whether or not to go, Partey's in loads of space, the unit of City presses up, and Gabriel is stood there with no pressure because Lewis-Skelly's pulled him, Ødegaard's pulled Kovacic, Haaland again is not really marking anyone in this situation, Omar Marmoush is applying pressure on Partey, and then Arsenal play one pass down the left-hand side and they are in. And they carry the ball towards Manchester City's goal, and it happens. I don't know what you made of it, but I thought that Manchester City out of possession were quite poor. I think they just don't seem to have the right energy in the front line. I think Foden's a really good presser, and I think he sets the tempo from the front, but I also don't think that he's got enough behind him to continue that press. And I think that, once he goes, I just feel like he gets no support.
I think if I'm looking at, everything and as a game as a collective, I think what really stood out to me was how uniform Arsenal were in all of their actions and how sort of disjointed Manchester City were. I think you can summarise the game in those two ways, and I don't necessarily think that's due to a lack of timing or a lack of trying from Manchester City. I think it's just the physicality issues. I think we spoke about it off air briefly, where that moment where Kovacic drops deep to receive the pass from Ortega, and Declan Rice pinches it off him by sprinting behind him and slide tackling the ball. But for me, when Manchester City reset the ball deeper to their keeper and your team's running back to receive the ball, the pace and the physicality isn't just a matter of getting back on transition defence. It's also, a problem in possession, because if Kovacic is faster, he gets to the ball and he can sweep that out to his player wide before Declan Rice gets to him and steals the ball and gives you that huge chance for Arsenal. Yeah, so I think it is a matter of physicality in there. Manchester City's press in the past has been brilliant with Gabriel Jesus, with Raheem Sterling, with a younger Bernardo Silva. I think these are all players who are fantastic in their press. Phil Foden in the front line, like you mentioned. And I think we still got players who can press well. Savinho, one of the best sort of young pressers that I've seen in the league from the front line. Marmoush is another one who I think can be really brilliant in his pressure. Phil Foden obviously is great when pressing from the front line. I think it's a matter of using your players who will press and who are familiar with sort of pressing angles in the best way, and then ensuring your midfielders back that up. Now, I think City don't have the midfielders to do that, and I think Erling Haaland probably doesn't press the front line as well as these other three. Barcelona, under Flick at times, have had Lewandowski sit on the pivot player centrally, and then have their wide players in Rafinha and Lamine Yamal narrow in and press the front two. And for me, I've always thought that's possibly an interesting solution for Guardiola to look at. Erling Haaland's not a player who's going to be pushing forward and pressing the front line that intensely. Yeah. But can you have him sit on one of the double pivot players of the opposition and then have your Savinhos and your Marmoushas cover more grass? Obviously, it's more intense. And Erling Haaland, by the way, has played, I think, 30 or 28 Premier League games this season. He's played a ridiculous amount, more than any player, I think, at Manchester City. And I think he's almost matched his tally for minutes from last season in its entirety in the league. So, look, there's a fatigue element to that. I think until City have more legs behind those two players, whether that's a Nico O'Reilly, who I doubt will play, but really has that physicality, or even an Ilkay Gundogan. I know he's not, the fastest and the most mobile, but he reads the game well and he gets in positions if paired with a slightly more physical player. Phil Foden, the third player, who I think I would probably want a little bit deeper in like a midfield three rather than in the attacking front line. But yeah, some of the same concerns that we've seen, and yeah, Arsenal were able to exploit them brilliantly in the game yesterday.
Yeah, I'm just going to run through 2 goals whilst we're at it, because I think whilst we're talking about Manchester City lacking, I actually thought, when we both mentioned it, I thought Arsenal were absolutely brilliant. We watched the game back last night and I thought they were exceptional. And I thought Miles Lewis-Skelly in this game and Declan Rice on that left-hand side was just kind of the difference maker. And I've got the MLS goal. I can't say Lewis-Skelly every time, so it's like I've got MLS's goal here, and we can see that Manchester City have compacted again onto the ball side of the pitch, and we can see that they've got Miles Lewis-Skelly between the lines, and on the side of City where they're defending, Bernardo Silva, Mateus Nunes, Foden and Marmoush are all compact on this side of the pitch, and it kind of leaves Kovacic with no one to mark. I felt that Kovacic in the block a lot of the times in this game, he was doing a really good job at defending that space, but there wasn't anyone in the space and they were all moving around him. But yeah, Lewis-Skelly just receives the ball in this position, and I feel like we'll touch on this when I get onto the Nwaneri goal, but the Arsenal's fullbacks having the freedom to roam into different spaces throughout the entire game and throughout the entire games this season. We often see it with Calafiori, but because Lewis-Skelly is a midfielder, the fact that he can go and stand between the lines and you can trust him to do whatever it takes in them pockets of space, I feel like it's really, really good for Arsenal, and it gives him a different dimension, because I don't think Calafiori's got the same quality as a Lewis-Skelly on the ball, and I think when he's in between the lines, his ability on the ball is ridiculous, and he's also physically competitive. He's one of Arsenal's best tacklers, best duel winners, and he's just so young, so technical, but so.
Did you see the way he used his back and his arms against Erling Haaland?
Yeah, when he was running side by side, and I feel like he's like an ox. So
yeah,
you just can't get him off the ball, and I just feel like in them pockets of space, not only has he got the ability to receive there and be technically secure, but he's also got the ability to then drive and ride contact as you would expect, like a Declan Rice to do. And he's got that strength, but he's got that nimbleness. And then I'm going to throw it on again to Nwaneri's goal, and I know this was at 4-1 in the 92nd minute, but we can see the same exact thing. We've got Gabriel, Raheem Sterling, Calafiori, Declan Rice, all on this left side again. And again for Manchester City, you can just see how they've dragged everyone. And in the first picture, Nwaneri's got his hands up because he knows he's going to become the spare man. In the second frame, he's got his hands up. In the third frame, he's still got his hands up. And we can see that Declan Rice is actually holding the width on the left here. And that's giving Bernardo Silva, Foden, Mateus Nunes, Akanji really difficult jobs to keep up with their men. And then the ball is circulated outside the block, and Gabriel Martinelli picks it up. You can see across field that Nwaneri he's stood with absolutely loads of space in front of him, and Marino is occupying both Gvardiol and John Stones, and the ball is eventually worked over to Nwaneri, and it's timed beautifully with this Marino run to drag Gvardiol even further away from Nwaneri. And I feel like it was such a structured pattern in the 92nd minute from substitutes who have just come on the pitch. They've come on the pitch and they want to make a difference, and they're doing it through positionless routines. They're running and they're arriving in spaces to drag people away, and they're playing with this free-flowing attitude against a really, really settled defence and a really good team in Manchester City, albeit they're not great right now. But they are choreographing certain moves with the fullbacks, with the rotations, that are really, really causing teams problems, and they're doing it with players that are coming off the bench, players that you would expect to just kind of jog around for the last 3-4 minutes in the game. You're winning 4-1. But they're putting together these really, really patterned rotations. Marino running inside, Nwaneri, he's open. They're doing the overload to isolate. It's so good to watch. And that was probably one of Arsenal's best performances of the season. Not just because he did it against Manchester City, but I feel like all of the goals were really, really well coached. The pressing for the goals was good. They used wide rotations on both the goals. And without Bukayo Saka as well. Yeah, and all without Bukayo Saka, and I feel like it couldn't have really gone any better for Arsenal apart from getting a clean sheet. And it was crazy. I actually thought City were decent to start off, but
I think first 65,
just easing
70,
to the game,
we were in there, yeah.
Yeah. And I just feel like there was just certain patterns that just started to click, and when the players got a bit more brave on the ball, and I think the setback from that Erling Haaland goal was actually something that sparked him and went, we can't do this again, we've got to start playing, we've got to start being more free on the ball, we've got to start taking risks. And I feel like the on-pitch attitude from the players and like the actual application to go, nah, we're gonna force it to happen now. I just thought they were brilliant.
On the contrary, just to wrap things, I'll just say I do think City, after Arsenal got that goal back in such quick succession, not necessarily lost their heads, but played sort of, more with their heart than with their brains. I think that's why we saw a lot of, their players, or our players rather, moving to one side and leaving, spaces open. I mean, it's something that Guardiola's touched upon in the post-match. I don't know if you want to throw up the quotes, I can't remember them specifically, but he did mention about the last 10, 15, 20, it being a problem that City did inflict upon themselves a little bit. But yeah, not to take anything away from Arsenal, I think they did, up their tempo and things, but I think City, how City changed how they played a little bit, fed into that a little bit. But yeah, credit to Arsenal, brilliant performance, and one to take with them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this analysis piece, please don't forget to like, comment, and follow us on all platforms. And if you want to listen to the podcast, please check us out on all audio streaming platforms. And we'll catch you next week for more Premier League reviews. See you later.